A heavy dusk slid over Namaquequa like a shawl, and then as if someone pinched the horizon, the power blinked out. The television in Rose's sitting room coughed, fell silent, and her little siblings chorused a disappointed, eh. Rose carried her books to the veranda where air still moved, crickets sawing at the edges, Mount Elgon a dark thought on the skyline. She struck a match and set a candle in a chipped saucer, the wick sputtering into a calm, patient flame. Michael arrived in a rust-colored sweater, breath fogging just a little in the evening cool, the smell of rain and wood smoke stitched to him. "Yumim has done their thing again," he said, setting his notebooks beside hers. When his fingers brushed the margin of her physics notes, Rose felt the candle see her. How else to explain the sudden warm attention light gave their faces? They leaned in, edges of their knees almost touching, solving simultaneous equations with the soft scratch of pencil and the sound of a neighbor's radio sputtering and dying. When Rose struggled to draw a circuit diagram from memory, Michael guided her hand, tracing the arc of the resistor with his fingertip on the paper. The world contracted to the circle of light. Somewhere inside that circle, a future flickered too, hazardous and lovely like flame. Before he left, the wind pressed the curtain against the doorway, a ghost of gauze. Michael paused, looking at her in the tilted light. "We can make this work," he said quietly, and though they were speaking of exams, Rose felt something else settle between them, an agreement older than words. By the second week of outages they had a routine. Rose's mother sent out a tray with 2 enamel mugs of black tea and slices of dense, spiced cake. Her brothers were bribed with roasted groundnuts to leave the veranda alone. Michael brought spare candles wrapped in newspaper. They arranged books in a half-moon, placing the candle where shadows wouldn't swallow the page margins. They practiced mapping, district boundaries, rivers running thin as veins across paper, Mpalagoma, Manafwa, until the geography of each other eclipsed the atlas. Michael watched Rose when she concentrated, the way her bottom lip tucked inward, the tiny furrow between her brows as if knowledge was a knot she could pull free with patience. Rose watched Michael's hands, steady and elegant, false starts erased in feathery curls. A storm shouldered in from the foothills, the veranda roof drumming, candle flame bowing but unextinguished. They sat closer, their shoulders accidentally, then intentionally touching. "When we pass," Michael said, "I'll apply to the engineering program in Bale." He smiled sideways. "And you, nursing, right? You'd argue with every doctor." Rose laughed softly. "I'd argue for my patients." She looked at him, then rain caught in his eyelashes. The smallness of the moment, tea, thunder, the gold around his pupils, felt like a vow. When the rain thinned to a hush, he reached for her hand, and she let their fingers interlace on the table where the atlas had been. The candle burned down another inch, a visible measure of the distance they'd closed. The eviction notice appeared like a bad dream, a paper flapping on the gate at noon, rooster pecking beside it. Rose's mother tore it down and read it with a voice that belonged to someone older, someone who counted pills in the dark. Rent in arrears. Development planned. 30 days. That night the veranda light felt different. The candle flame shivered even without wind, the tea tasted like memory. Rose tried to read her biology chapter but the words swam, tadpoles of ink. Michael turned the notice over and calculated numbers on the back, sums that pinned hope like butterflies. How many Rolexes would they have to sell? How many weekend tutoring sessions? How many bricks carried for the builder down the road? "We could do a night study program," he suggested, tapping the wood of the table as if the plan could take root. "Charge small, make it safe, your veranda is already school." He smiled, trying to be light. "If the lights stay out, we sell lantern time." Rose stared at their hands, hers ink-smudged, his dusted with brick grit from an afternoon of labor, then lifted her eyes. There were years inside Michael's gaze tonight, all of them crowding into this one candle circle. "Okay," she whispered. "We try." The yes felt like an embrace they couldn't risk making with their arms. Word moved faster than daylight. By Friday, 3 neighbors' children and a shy boy from across the lane were on the veranda with sharpened pencils. Michael drew up a timetable, Rose designed neat handouts by hand, copying diagrams until her fingers cramped. They charged coins that clinked softly in a washed peanut butter jar. Between explanations of Ohm's law and the digestive system, their eyes found each other and rested there. When the children left at 8, they exhaled the day. The veranda belonged to them again. Mango leaves whispering, a far boda cough, and their breathing synced like 2 lines of a poem. Rose's shoulder brushed Michael's chest as she reached to snuff a lantern. She froze, feeling the thud of his heart through the thin sweater. He didn't step back. The air drew tight as string, she could count the candle's breaths. He touched her cheekbone with the back of his fingers, careful, reverent, asking with a gesture what he didn't dare say aloud. Their first kiss was unhurried and tender, the kind of kiss that happened because both of them leaned into the same thought at once. It was brief, blessed by soft laughter at the end when the neighbor's goat sneezed. They stood forehead to forehead after, the candle's halo holding them, their plans and fear braided into something like courage. Days began to taste like counting. Rose counted coins, counted questions, counted the number of times her mother stood at the gate looking down the road as if rescue wore a particular pair of shoes. Michael counted new students, evening clouds, the calls he made to someone who knew someone at the district office. The notice, refold, lived under the candle saucer now, its creases grew whiter. They ferried hope in small containers. Michael bought a second-hand solar lamp with his savings from mixing cement. For when even candles fail, he said, setting it on the table like an altarpiece. Rose brought out a jar where she had been saving for nursing school. Together they fed it, coins, a folded note, a promise written on a scrap, we will stay. At night, exhaustion made them honest. Rose confessed how the word eviction crawled under her skin and made a nest. Michael admitted he feared passing his exams and then being unable to afford the next step, a key with no door. Their kisses grew deeper, not longer, still careful, still chaste but echoing with the intensity of two people inching toward a cliff and trying to build it into a bridge as they walked. Rumors run along ridges like rain. Someone said the landlord, Mr. Okrit, had already taken a down payment from a petrol station company. Someone else swore the papers were illegal. Rose's mother kept her face like a locked box, but the way she stirred pasho and beans, hard, fast, betrayed the beat of worry. The veranda class swelled to 8 students. Michael's explanations turned softer, more patient, even as fatigue mapped itself under his eyes. When the younger ones stumbled on fractions, Rose guided their fingers along numerators and denominators the way Michael had once guided hers along a resistor, and some quiet part of her thrilled at the symmetry of care. Later, when the students were gone and the sky was a vault pricked with cautious stars, Michael drew Rose into the slant of the doorway to escape the eyes of the road. He held her like someone holding both a person and an idea. She felt the tremor in his chest and pressed closer, answering it with her own heartbeat. I don't want to plan for a life without you, he whispered, his mouth a breath from her temple. She turned her face to meet his, their kiss salted with the sweat of worry, sweet with everything they didn't have words for. They began a ledger. Not of debts or deadlines but small braveries. Rose's first entry, I asked Mama what she would need to feel safe. The answer, 6 months of rent up front or a paper saying we can stay, was a mountain but naming it made the climb more real. Michael's entry, I spoke to the head teacher about renting the classroom porch in the evenings. The head teacher had frowned, then nodded slowly, the fee was almost possible. They stapled hand-drawn flyers to light poles. Evening revision is safe, quiet, fair price. The irony of advertising light by candlelight made them laugh, and the laughter carried them through a day when Mr. Okrit arrived unannounced, eyes like cold coins, to remind them of the deadline. That night, they sat without studying, just holding the ledger between them like a child. Write this one, Michael said finally. We didn't let fear have the last word today. Rose wrote it down in careful script, then leaned into him. They didn't kiss. They breathed the same slow breath, the candle making a brief sun of their hinge point moment. On Sunday, Michael borrowed his uncle's boda and rode with Rose toward Seepy Falls, the road unspooling under them, the wind undoing a week's worth of tightness in the muscles of their faces. They walked the last stretch, red earth yielding under their sandals, water speaking a language older than eviction notices and exam timetables. They sat where the spray cooled their cheeks and let silence do the teaching. Love, they discovered, expanded around honesty. Michael spoke of his father, lost to a factory accident when he was 10. Rose spoke of the nights her mother counted coins by the dim light of a taduba and pretended they were enough. At some point their fingers found each other and stayed, palms learning new geographies. On the ride back, the world felt both more possible and more precarious. If we can't stop the eviction, Rose murmured into Michael's shoulder, promise we won't stop this. He turned his head slightly, the corner of his mouth brushing her hairline, an almost kiss that left a warm comet trail. I promise, he said, and the road, the river, and the ridge line seemed to witness it. On Monday the head teacher's permission arrived like relief in an envelope. They could rent the P7 porch for evening revision if they kept it orderly and left the place cleaner than they found it. Michael read the letter twice, then grinned at Rose so widely she forgot, for a heartbeat, about the paper under the candle saucer at home. They carried benches together as dusk softened the schoolyard, their shadows long and companionable. The first night on the porch, 20 students came, some in uniforms, some in church skirts and sandals, all bright-eyed with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. Rose organized them by subject. Michael wrote "current plus capacity equals possibility" on the blackboard and drew a little bulb at the end of a wire. When a breeze moved through, the porch smelled of chalk and mango leaves. A small economy began. Coins dropped into their jar, soft thank yous dropped into their bones. Afterward, the world shrank to two again. They lingered by the staff room doorway, the campus a hush of crickets and gravel. Rose's scarf had slipped from her shoulders. Michael lifted it back, careful fingers skimming the warm line of her neck. "You're trembling?" he whispered. "With joy," she said, and it was true, but also with the nearness of him. He cupped her face and kissed her gently, and when they parted, their foreheads rested together like matched stones. In the dark glass of a classroom window, they looked like a promise the night had decided to keep. They wrote a petition to the LC1 chair, pages passing between them like a conversation. "We ask for mediation. We ask for time. We ask because this house has taught half the lane to read." Neighbors lined the margin with signatures. Pastor David added his, then tucked a small note into Michael's palm. "For the rent jar," he said, not meeting their eyes. That afternoon Mr. Oakert came himself, a measuring tape hanging from his belt like a tail of metal. He walked the yard, lips pursed, and told them ground would break in 2 weeks. "It is progress," he said. "Uganda is moving forward." Rose's mother met his gaze squarely. "To move forward, people must stand somewhere," she answered. He shrugged, eyes sliding. "Stand somewhere else." Night returned like an old teacher you feared and loved. On the porch, Michael almost forgot the shape of his own voice until he turned to find Rose watching him with that fierce, steady trust that made him taller. When the last student left, he sat on a bench, legs shaking with anger he didn't know where to put. Rose sat beside him and slid her hand into his, their fingers lacing as easily as breath. "We will not beg for dignity," she said. "But we can ask for witnesses." He kissed her knuckles, slow and sure. "Then let's show them what light can do." The flyer read, "Candlelight Marathon, Community Revision and Fundraiser, come with a candle, leave with hope." By 6, the schoolyard looked like a constellation that had fallen to earth. Parents stood at the edges, the curious pressed closer, and the LC1 chair himself arrived with a skeptical smile that softened as the night wore on. Michael taught electricity by borrowing from what they were living. Resistance is not the end, it is the measure by which current learns another way. Rose ran a first aid corner for tired eyes and cramped fingers, her touch a quiet miracle that made even anxious boys believe their hearts could slow. Halfway through, the radio presenter from the local station appeared, microphone like a small spear of attention. "Why candles?" she asked. "Because we don't have a choice," Michael said, "but also because we do." He held up the solar lamp he'd been repairing, explained how a bottle of water stuck into a tin roof could refract daylight into dark rooms. People clapped. Someone dropped a folded note into the jar hard enough that it clinked against the glass bottom, and then more hands followed. When the crowd thinned, music drifted from a phone speaker, a slow, grainy song. Under the bluing sky, they drew close, barely moving. Rose's cheek found Michael's shoulder. His palms spread at the small of her back, respectful but certain, as if he were steadying both of them against a wind only they could feel. Their kisses that night were brief, the kind that leave the mouth smiling even while the eyes are wet. Hope was not a sum they had fully reached, but the arithmetic had turned in their favor. Exams began with the sharp smell of new paper and the soft panic of pencils. The porch went quiet except for whispered prayers. Michael's mind, usually nimble, felt strangely heavy until he saw Rose at the far desk, chin lifted like a flag he could rally beneath. He started with the questions he knew, let momentum do the mercy. By the time he reached the circuit analysis, his hands were steady. After biology, Rose walked out into a light drizzle and breathed the clean edge of rain. She wanted to cry or sleep for 7 days, or run until the fear of results fell behind her like a country she was leaving. Instead she found Michael under the jacaranda near the fence, purple petals on his sweater like spilled ink. He opened his arms without a word, she stepped into them. The hug was deep and unguarded, the kind that softens the heart's hard shell. Their kiss carried the taste of rain and graphite, their work and their relief shared almost like communion. At home the eviction clock ticked louder. The LC1 chair promised a meeting. The rent jar was heavier but not heavy enough. They wrote in the ledger, "We kept our heads in the exam hall. We kept each other from drowning afterward." In candlelight they drafted a speech for the mediation, Calm, factual, pleading only with what could be measured, hours taught, children served, a community held together by a veranda's small light. They gathered in the church hall. Pastor David, two aunties who loved to argue, the LC1 chair, Mr. Okrit with papers like small shields. Rose's mother spoke first, voice steady. Michael followed, presenting the ledger and the rent jar totals. "We can clear half now," he said, "and set a schedule for the rest. We just need time." The LC1 chair nodded, tapped a pen. Pastor David murmured about stewardship. Then the landlord's face did something unexpected. It flickered. "The bank is pressing me," he said, gaze briefly human. "I did take a deposit. But I can give 30 more days if the first half clears by Friday." It wasn't mercy, it was math that favored them for once. The room exhaled. They walked home under a sky of careful stars. At the gate, Rose tugged Michael to a stop. 30 days is still a cliff," she said. "Yes," he answered, "but we've learned to build planks." She laughed, breath hitching on the edge of tears, then pulled him close. The kiss was longer, full of relief and warning. When they broke apart, their fingerprints were bright on each other's cheeks where tears had tracked through dust. The week became a sprint. Michael mixed cement in the mornings and fixed radios at noon. Rose sold chapati and ran the porch in the evening. Students kept coming even after their own exams, some to learn, some to help. A tailor offered to mend the torn veranda curtain. An old mason carried a bench without being asked. The jar filled. They walked to the bank together with a borrowed envelope, the sound of coins replaced by the terrifying softness of counted notes. They paid the first half. The receipt felt like a new kind of candle. They held it between them and almost laughed from relief. That night, the porch was too small to hold their gratitude. They took a slow walk beyond the last houses to where the fields opened, Mount Elgon a dark shoulder against the sky. Michael shrugged off his sweater and wrapped it around Rose. She leaned into him until their breathing matched the rhythm of frogs and distant boda engines. Words ran out. Their quiet mattered more. They kissed with care and with awe, the way people drink when they've been thirsty a long time. When they finally stepped apart, the night felt gentler, as if the future had moved a fraction closer and decided to stay. Results came the same morning the bulldozer did, an absurd pairing that would have been funny if it hadn't made Rose's stomach drop. Michael's hands shook as he opened his paper. An A in physics. An A in math. Rose's letter. Admission to nursing at Mbale School of Health Sciences. They laughed, then cried, then laughed again until the machine coughed and reminded them the world does not pause for joy. The second half of the rent had not yet been reached. But something else had been. Attention. Parents, students, and the LC1 chair stood in the road, a cluster of voices that asked questions, that asked for decency in public, that asked, above all, for time. The contractor made a call. The bulldozer idled. 2 weeks, he said finally. Then we must move. 2 weeks can be the difference between losing and leaving. They packed and measured quiet, pots, schoolbooks, the ledger, the saucer that had held every candle. Pastor David found them a small room behind the dispensary, cheap and clean, with a square of sky that caught morning. On the last night at the veranda, they lit one more candle and sat knee to knee. "This was the beginning," Michael said, gesturing at the table scarred by years of elbows and hope. "Wherever we go, we carry the light." Rose nodded, eyes glimmering. "And we keep the porch, by another name." Their kiss was not a period but a colon. It said, "This continues." Next evening in the dispensary yard they set up benches. Children came, then parents. The jar waited, the ledger opened. Above them, a different piece of sky, and still, because two people had chosen it, a circle of light that refused to go out.